all the truths they buried too. Preserve peace. These forces do not return politely. They burst forth like volcanoes long held dormant, and the empath who is always identified with being good, kind, gentle, is terrified by their own capacity for fire. But I tell you, this fire is sacred. It is not destruction. It is purification. It is the soul reclaiming its boundaries, its right to exist, its divine fury at having been diminished. And it is in this moment that the empath finally realizes they were never here to be, consumed by others' wounds. They were here to witness them, not to die within them. The narcissist confronted with this fire recoils. They will often accuse the empires of becoming someone else, of being cold, cruel, distant. But the truth is, the empress is not becoming someone else. They are becoming whole. They are integrating. The split between the persona, the mask of kindness, and the shadow, the hidden truth is dissolving. The empath is no longer playing the role of healer. They are becoming real. This process is not linear. It does not unfold with grace. Often the empath will feel guilt, shame, even longing for the narcissist after leaving. Why? Because the narcissist did not just mirror pain. They mirrored the wounded child within the empires, the part of them that felt invisible, unworthy, or unlovable, unless they were needed. This inner child must be held, not judged. The empath must turn their compassion inward now to themselves, and this is the hardest part to love. Oneself after years of abandonment. To forgive the self for participating in the illusion, to grieve not only the relationship but the fantasy of who the narcissist could have been. The psychic bond does not break with logic. It breaks with truth, and truth must be felt in the body, not just known by the mind. This is why the empath often experiences fatigue, shaking, even sickness. After leaving the body is releasing what the soul has carried for far too long. In dreams, the symbols begin to shift. The empath may see bridges, thresholds, gates. They may dream of lions, serpents, sacred rivers. These are not random, they are initiations. The soul is guiding them back into the realm of the archetype, not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign. The lion, for example, often represents courage, the emergence of the authentic self. The serpent, transformation, the shedding of old skin, the river flow, the restoration of inner life after stagnation. When I speak of these things, I do not speak as a mystic who has abandoned science. I speak as one who sees no boundary between psyche and symbol, between neuron and numbness, what you call healing. I call reintegration, what you call awakening. I call individuation the sacred journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The empath, once torn between needing love and fearing loss, begins to root themselves in something deeper. The self, not the ego, not the persona, but the silent eternal center that has, always whispered beneath the noise. The self does not beg to be loved. It is love. And from that place, the empath no longer enters relationships to be saved. They enter to share. Now, the narcissist, still trapped in their labyrinth of grandiosity, may attempt to return. They may send messages laced with guilt or praise or regret, but make no mistake, this is not awakening. This is withdrawal. The loss of supply. The narcissist does not mourn the empath. They mourn the loss of control, of reflection, of power. And here the empath must remember, to re-enter the cycle is to betray the self. Forgiveness is possible. Compassion is noble, but reunion is not always sacred. Sometimes the holiest act of love is distance. This boundary is not cruelty. It is protection, not of the ego but of the soul. The empath's light must now be directed inward, illuminating the caverns they once avoided, the wounds from childhood, the inherited beliefs about love and pain, the shadow of the healer, the one who gave to others what they never gave themselves. This is the alchemical phase of solution of the false self, and it leads to the rebirth of the archetype, not as victim, but as mystic. The empath becomes the one who sees not only others but themselves. They learn to speak their needs not with apology but with authority. They learn to sit in solitude without seeking rescue. They learn to love without losing themselves. And in doing so, they become dangerous, not because they harm, but because they no longer participate in harm. The narcissist, if they ever do awaken, must begin their own journey. But the empath is no longer the guide. They have stepped out of the role. They are no longer the nurse in someone else's nightmare. They are now the sovereign in their own dream. This is the snap, not a break, but a breakthrough. Not the end, but the beginning of true consciousness. Let us pause once more. In part 3, I shall explore how this transformation echoes through the collective psyche, how it changes not only the individual but the entire psychic field, and how the empath once healed becomes not a rescuer but a mirror of truth. When the empath transcends the wound, the psychic reverberation does not end at the threshold of their own healing. No, something greater is stirred in the collective unconscious. You must not underestimate the archetypal potency of such a rupture. What occurs within one's soul when they reclaim themselves from the jaws of narcissistic possession echoes outward like ripples across a sacred lake. It is not merely personal healing. It is mythic correction. I have long taught that the unconscious is not merely an individual phenomenon. It is collective. There is woven beneath the fabric of our daily perception a vast field of symbolic memory, of inherited meaning, of ancient patterns that each of us participates in. So when the empath awakens, they do not simply withdraw from an unhealthy relationship. They rise from an ancestral lineage of silenced mystics, unseen givers, and scapegoated visionaries. They rupture a generational contract that said you must suffer so others can survive. This is not metaphor. This is psychogenealogical reality. The empath often carries the unprocessed wounds of the family system. They become the emotional sponge. The psychic lightning rod, the one who intuitively knows what others refuse to name. As children, they learn to read the room. Before they learn to read a book, they survive by attuning to danger, to silence, to unspoken needs. And when they meet the narcissist later in life, it is not coincidence. It is a recurrence. The narcissist embodies the very shadow. The empath grew up with emotional neglect, cloaked in authority, manipulation disguised as love. And yet this meeting, however painful, is not a punishment. It is a summons. For within the torment lies the initiation. The narcissist becomes the unknowing priest of the empath's awakening, delivering them. Through suffering to the altar of the self, it is only through being consumed that the empath remembers their hunger. It is only through invisibility that they reclaim their faith. You ask what becomes of such an empath after the snap. Do they trust again? Do they love again? Yes, but differently. They no longer seek to merge. They seek to meet. They no longer give to be needed. They give to be known. The frequency of their soul shifts where once they attracted those who required rescue. They now attract those who reflect resonance. Equals mirrors, not voids. This shift cannot be faked. It is not a matter of affirmations or declarations. It is an energetic reality born of deep inner reconstitution. You see the empath once fragmented into archetypal polarities. Victim, martyr, savior has retrieved those lost pieces. They have integrated. They have danced with their rage and not been consumed. They have sat with their fear and not fled. They have loved themselves without demand. In the language of alchemy, this is the stage of conjuncture, the sacred marriage, not with another but within the masculine and feminine energies. Once split and externalized, now harmonize inside the psyche. The need to be completed dissolves, and from this inner union, the empath no longer walks the earth as a seeker but as a source. But let us return for a moment to the narcissist. What becomes of them in this equation? You must understand the narcissist is not evil. They are wounded. They are frozen in the trauma of a fractured ego. A child who learned that the only way to survive was to dominate, to control today vulnerability. But do not mistake this understanding for an invitation to return. Healing the narcissist is not the empath's task. The empath's task is to withdraw the projection, to reclaim the part of themselves that believed love must hurt to be real. If the narcissist ever embarks on their own healing, it must come through their own confrontation with emptiness. And most never do, because to awaken from narcissism is to face a death, the death of the false self, the persona constructed to protect the inner void. Few are willing to walk through that fire, and so they seek new mirrors, new empaths, new reflections to keep the illusion alive. This is why it is so vital for the empath once awakened to speak not necessarily to the narcissist but to the world, to share what they have seen, not as vengeance but as liberation. There are others still sleeping, still giving, still dying within the wrong story. And the empath reborn becomes a torchbearer. They begin to speak in symbols, to paint, to write, to teach. They become healers not by title, but by presence. Their words carry weight because they have bled. Their eyes see truth because they have cried in darkness. They are no longer obsessed with being liked. They are devoted to being real. I have seen this evolution many times in patients in dream work in the myths of old. The empath becomes the mystic. The trauma survivor becomes the seer. The silenced child becomes the oracle. And the world so long addicted to domination begins to tremble, not in fear, but in recognition. For the return of the empath's voice is the return of OS, the sacred thread of relatedness that the narcissistic world forgot. And what does this mean for us all? It means we must re-examine the narratives we were given about love, about giving, about sacrifice. It means we must challenge the culture that rewards exploitation and silences intuition. It means we must teach our children that boundaries are not walls but bridges to truth. The empath who snaps is not broken. They are reclaimed. They no longer fit the mold. They no longer shrink to be digestible. They become paradox, soft and fierce, kind and firm, open and discerning. And this paradox is precisely what our age requires, for the narcissistic structure of society cannot be dismantled by more obedience. It must be dissolved by authenticity. When the empath snaps, they cease to play the game. And in doing so, they change the rules. And yes, it is lonely at first. To wake up from illusion is to grieve. The empath must mourn the version of themselves that stayed small to feel safe. They must mourn the people who only loved the unawakened version of them. They must mourn the story that said their worth was found in suffering. But after the mourning comes the clarity, the stillness, the sacred pause where the soul breathes again. Colors return, the body softens, and they find that they are not empty without the narcissist. They are free, and freedom, my friend, is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of truth, exposed again. And now we enter the final chamber of this transformation. The part no one sees, because by the time the empath has walked through the fire, they are no longer explaining themselves. They are no longer asking to be understood. They are no longer waiting for the world to catch up. The empath has become sovereign. Sovereignty is not dominance. It is not power over another. It is a full reclamation of one's psychic center. It is the return to the self, not the small egoic self that pleads and performs, but the great self that witnesses, integrates, and creates. And once the empath roots themselves in that self, they become immovable, not hard but grounded, unreal, but no longer penetrable by manipulation. At this point, they no longer define themselves in opposition to the narcissist. Their identity is no longer the one who survived or the one who escaped. That is only the middle chapter. The empath now becomes something far more mysterious. The one who sees truly sees without needing to fix, absorb, or defend. This vision is born from shadow. You see, the emperor's journey is not about erasing pain. It is about integrating it. This is the most terrifying thing for someone who is trained to please, to turn and face the monster within the rage. The selfishness, the jealousy, the need for control, and to hold it with compassion, not shame. What we call the shadow is not evil. It is rejected life. It is the soul's suppressed expression, wrapped in fear. When the empath finally dares to feel their anger, to name their grief, to honor their needs, they begin to metabolize the shadow, and what once felt dangerous now feels holy. The split inside begins to mend. The psychic pressure loosens. The narcissist is a teacher of the shadow, but only if the empath stops, dancing to the tune. Until then, the empath is trapped in projection, confusing external chaos for internal truth. But when the empire finally says no more and begins to ask, why was I drawn to this in the first place? That is when the archetypal work begins. The mirror turns inward. And what do they find? They find the child, the silent, sensitive, watchful child, the one who learned that love meant sacrifice, that attention had to be earned, that existing came with conditions. And when the empath holds that child not as a problem but as a beloved, something miraculous happens. The past begins to release its grip. This is deep psychic repair, the kind that cannot be forced through intellect. It comes through presence, through slowness, through breath and silence and unlearning. It is the repairing of the soul, the reweaving of trust within the self. And with every small act of self-honoring rest, boundary expression, the empath carves new grooves in the psyche, grooves of safety, of inner companionship, Now relationships become mirrors, not crutches. The empath no longer looks for completion in others. They look for resonance. They can sit across from another and feel the pull of old patterns, but instead of falling into them, they witness them. They say quietly, here is the part of me that once needed this chaos to feel alive. And then they choose differently. This is mastery. It is not perfection. It is not invulnerability. It is awareness, and awareness creates choice. And what of love? What becomes of love? Once the empath stops confusing it with suffering, love transforms. It softens without surrendering the self. It listens without absorbing pain. It gives without needing to disappear. It receives without guilt. It grows roots not in fantasy but in shared truth. Love becomes not a story the empath clings to but the practice they embody, and because they are no longer fragmented, the emperor's love is no longer a signal flare to the broken. It is an invitation to the whole. Their frequency changes. They may still feel deeply, yes, but they are no longer defined by emotional overexertion. They are defined by clarity, by presence, by sacred restraint. The narcissist, if they still watch from afar, cannot understand this transformation. The empath no longer responds, no longer defends, no longer entertains the performance. The narcissist cannot seduce what has become sovereign. They cannot bait what has left the game. And so they move on to seek the next unawakened mirror. But the empath, now mystic, walks a different path. They walk with others who know how to see. They no longer fear being alone because they have become intimate with themselves. They no longer seek chaos for excitement because peace no longer feels like boredom. They no longer accept breadcrumbs because they remember now they are the feast. This is not arrogance. This is return, a return to original essence, a return to truth, a return to sacred vision. And what of their gift? The emperor's gift has always been sensitivity, intuition, resonance. But before awakening, that gift was outwardly directed, used to decode others, to please others, to heal others who never asked to be healed. After the awakening, that gift is no longer leaked. It is channeled. It becomes art teaching, holding space for truth without rescuing lies. The empath becomes the wise one in the village, not because they speak loudly, but because they know when. Silence holds more power than speech. Not because they control, but because they see. Not because they are safe, but because their presence reminds others they are already whole. They become dangerous in the best way, unshakable. They become mysterious in the deepest way. Unhooked from drama, they become magnetic in the truest way. Not because they try, but because they are. And I must remind you, this is not a destination. It is a spiral. The work continues. The shadow still rises. Old wounds still whisper. But now the empath knows how to listen without obeying, to feel without losing center, to hold pain without becoming it. And that, my friend, is the difference between before and after. Before the empath lived in reaction. After the empath lives in response. Before they gave to survive. After they give from overflow. Before they fear being too much. After they are no longer apologizing for their existence. This is the birth of the spiritual warrior. Not the one who fights with force, but the one who stands in truth. The one who knows that the real battle is always within, and the real victory is always wholeness. So I say again, when the empire snaps, the narcissist may never see it coming, but the soul always did. The soul knew it would lead here, to the end of pretending, to the collapse of illusion, to the emergence of the real. And from here the empath no longer walks with wounds. They walk with wisdom. They no longer seek light, they radiate it. They no longer beg to be chosen. They choose themselves. They become finally what they were always destined to be. Not saviors, but mirrors of the sacred. Let us now descend one last time into the deep stillness where all illusions are stripped away, not in violence, but in reverence. What remains after the empath snaps is not ruin, but a renewal, a silence, not of emptiness, but of completion, a quietude. So rich it hums with a memory of everything that has been seen, felt,